My name is Matthew Kane, and for as long as I can remember, I've been drawn to a life of service. Not in some reckless, thrill-seeking way, but with a deep sense of purpose. Growing up in a small California town, I watched my father, an officer with the local police force, go about his duties with a calm courage and humble dedication. He didn't wear the badge for the glory or the power. For him, it was a calling to protect and serve. When I turned 20, I followed in his footsteps, joining the police academy. Over the next 22 years, policing became my life. I lived and breathed it. Every shift was a chance to make a difference, to keep people safe, and to offer hope in moments of fear or danger. I've always believed in God and often sensed His presence in my work, especially at times when the odds were stacked against me, yet somehow everything turned out okay. There were days I swore I could hear Him in the wail of a distant siren, or see His hand in the way a tense standoff ended peacefully. But in the last few years, something started to shift. Crime felt more intense. Situations escalated faster, and desperation on the streets seemed to grow at an alarming rate. We used to have moments of calm between crises. Now, it felt like there was no lull at all. I couldn't help but wonder, why? Why had things gotten so dire? Was it a failing system, poverty, or something deeper? That question weighed on me, especially during the gang-related crime waves of 2025. Those months were like nothing I'd ever seen. Violence seemed almost personal, like it was alive and targeting every vulnerable corner of our city. Even with decades of experience, I felt helpless, as though I was fighting an unseen enemy I couldn't fully understand. I prayed more than ever, asking God for guidance, for strength, for answers. Instead of clarity, I felt a nagging doubt. Was I still making a difference? Was this work even part of His plan anymore? January 15th started like any other day on patrol. I was part of a special task force assigned to a dangerous neighborhood where gang tensions had been simmering for weeks. Our team had been working non-stop, picking up extra shifts and swapping out only for a few hours rest. By 7 a.m., the air felt thick with tension. Dispatch called in. Several known gang members had been seen heading toward a small street lined with mom-and-pop stores, places that hadn't even opened their doors yet. We drove over to check it out, splitting into pairs to canvass the area. It was the kind of mission I'd done countless times before, but something about this one felt different, and I couldn't shake the sense that today would be a turning point. While scanning the neighborhood, we spotted a suspicious vehicle, engine running, parked at the curb. Two individuals stood nearby, their postures tense. Their eyes flicked in our direction. My partner whispered, "They're armed." We called in backup, but the next moments erupted in chaos. Shots rang out. Too many, too fast to count. My training took over. We dived behind our cruiser. I radioed for assistance. Officer down, shots fired. We were pinned, and my heart pounded like a drum. God, I need you now, I prayed, the words ringing in my mind with more desperation than I'd ever felt before. In the melee, we returned fire, managing to drive the suspects off. But in the final burst of gunfire, I felt a deep, searing pain in my side. The world spun, sirens wailed, and as I collapsed, everything went dark. I don't remember the ambulance ride, only that I woke up somewhere else entirely. At first I thought I was dreaming, but this new realm was too real. Soft, radiant light came from everywhere, bathing me in warmth that settled into my very being. Every fear, every ounce of exhaustion melted away. I felt an indescribable peace. I tried to look down to see if I was bleeding, to check for my badge or uniform, but I realized that I no longer had a body in the way I'd always known one. And yet, I was more myself than ever, my essence, my soul, stripped of pain and fear. In that moment, I felt truly alive. Suddenly, I noticed I wasn't alone. A presence filled the space around me, a knowing and loving awareness. It saw every failure, doubt, and regret I'd ever had, and embraced me anyway. Unconditional love. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. I felt home. For a timeless moment, I existed in that radiant peace. But as my questions formed, where am I? Am I dead? I began to see faint glimpses of the world I'd left behind. It was as though I was looking through frosted glass. I saw my body, slumped on the pavement, paramedics scrambling to revive me. I felt no attachment or fear, just a quiet understanding that that part of me was like an old coat I'd outgrown. but then something else came into view. Darkness, shadows, twisted, writhing shapes filled with malice. They moved around the violence on the streets, feeding on fear, anger, and hatred. I couldn't look away, as though I was being shown a truth, that the physical battles we fight every day have deeper, spiritual roots. Then, the light around me shifted, intensifying as a figure approached. Or maybe approached isn't quite right. It was as if he unfolded into my awareness, more real with every passing second. Everything in me recognized him immediately. Jesus. He radiated a power that was overwhelming, yet gentle and loving. My knees would have buckled if I still had them. Instead, I bowed in every way my being allowed. His voice surrounded me. Matthew, he knew my name. Do not be afraid. You have questions. Ask them. Words tumbled from me. Why am I here? Why me? His expression was filled with compassion. Because I love you, he said, and because you have a purpose. All my life, I'd sought purpose through my badge, protecting and serving. But things had grown darker in the streets. Why now? Why this way? You will understand, he answered. But first, there are things you must see. He turned my focus back to the world below, our own city streets marred by violence. But in this spiritual viewpoint, I could see more than the physical bullets and bloodshed. Malevolent forces thrived on rage, greed, and despair. And across the city, smaller pockets of light, goodness, compassion, and prayer pushed back. Jesus said these pockets of light were where hope and faith had not been abandoned. These dangers, he said, are not only crimes or gang fights, they're the physical manifestation of a deeper spiritual reality, a world that has turned from love, from truth. In my vision, I saw how every hateful act, every moment of selfishness or cruelty, fed those dark forces. Yet, where people chose kindness and faith, the darkness weakened. Looking at him, my voice trembled. How can I change any of this? I'm just one officer. He placed a hand on my shoulder, pouring his boundless love through me. You have a voice and a story. Share what you have seen. Tell the truth. Some will reject it, but others will hear. And for them, this truth will become a seed of hope. You only need to be faithful. With that, he showed me two possible futures. One in which people continued on this path, letting darkness and hatred consume entire communities, crime and fear growing unstoppable. The other showed pockets of light spreading, linking, pushing back darkness, hope, peace, healing. Time is running out, he said. Tell them I love them and am calling them back to me. They must choose. Then everything faded. His final words echoed like thunder. These trials are a warning and an invitation, a call to return to truth. The next thing I remember is the crush of gravity. My chest rose and fell painfully, as if breathing for the first time. Familiar sounds, the beep of hospital machines, muffled voices, bright lights. I opened my eyes to see my wife, Emma, hovering near the bed, tears brimming. Matthew, she breathed, you're back. My kids, Ellie and Noah, peeked around her. They rushed in, relief etched on their faces. I managed a weak smile. Physically, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, but spiritually, I was wide awake. Over the next few days, surrounded by friends and fellow officers, I realized I had a responsibility. Jesus' words echoed in me, share what you have seen. So I told Emma first. I described the light, the peace, Jesus' presence, and the vision of dark forces fueling violence. I confessed how I'd been given a message for everyone. I half expected her to question my sanity. Instead, she wrapped her arms around me. I believe you, she whispered. I can feel it. When I left the hospital, word spread among colleagues and friends, how I'd flatlined and then come back. Slowly, I shared my story. Some were skeptical and chalked it up to brain chemistry or oxygen deprivation. Others listened with tears in their eyes, admitting they too sensed a deeper spiritual struggle beneath the rising tide of violence. Surprisingly, a few local pastors invited me to speak. I found myself standing before small congregations and community groups, describing exactly what I had seen. The violence isn't just random, I told them. We can't fix this problem with force alone. We have to address the spiritual emptiness, the hatred, the fear. It starts with a return to faith, to love, to God. Many responded with renewed hope. Families that hadn't prayed or even talked together in years started gathering around kitchen tables, sharing devotionals, or just checking on each other's well-being. Officers who'd grown jaded took an extra moment to offer kindness on patrol, to truly see the people they served. Neighbors organized block watches where they'd also pray, building unity and trust. The ripple effects were visible. Some neighborhoods saw a drop in tensions, and a new sense of community emerged. Not everyone believed, of course. Some shrugged and said, "Glad you made it, Cain, but don't go preaching at me." I didn't argue. My job wasn't to force anyone's hand. My job was, and still is, to be faithful. Every time I felt doubt, I remembered Jesus' words, "Tell them what you have seen. I will do the rest." Months have passed since I walked out of that hospital. My daily routine has changed. I'm slower to anger, quicker to pray. I look at every call, every suspect, every victim with new eyes, remembering that behind the physical tension lies a spiritual reality. It's not easy, but the peace I felt in that glowing realm hasn't left me. It lives in me, a constant reminder of hope and purpose. This is my message to you. No matter how dark the world may seem, no matter how overwhelming the violence or fear, there is always light. We each carry a spark, and together those sparks push back the shadows. The time to choose is now. Love, truth, and faith can transform hearts and even entire cities. The smallest act of kindness can have a bigger impact than we can imagine. I'm sharing my story because I was asked to, plainly and simply. If it touches you, share it with someone else. Let it start conversations. Let it remind us that we're called to be more than just survivors in a chaotic world. We're invited to be points of light in the darkness. Thank you for listening. If what I've said resonates with you, take it into your heart. Let it inspire you. Because no matter what, there is always hope. There is always love. And there is always a chance to turn back to God. God bless you, and remember, be the light.